Hello everyone, welcome to my channel about writing stuff. My name is Camille and today we are going to talk about language. Now before we get started, the only language that I speak is English and a little bit of sarcasm. I'm not a linguist by any means, so probably want to take any advice I give you with a grain of salt. So let's get into it. The first thing you want to ask yourself is, do you really need languages in your world? You have this full secondary world, but if your story is just taking place in one city or one part of the world, there's a really good chance that your characters would just be speaking one language aside from maybe a greeting, or a curse word or something like that. So if you're not, really interested in creating languages, if that sort of idea sets you off, it bugs you, and you just really are not into it, then you don't have to create languages in your world. It's like anything else. You literally can just add it if you want it. So that's the big thing, is you don't have to have languages in your secondary world. But if you do, it can add a lot of depth. So when I want a language or several languages in my world, the first thing that I do is I pull out my map and I write and point out where each of these languages are spoken. And that's not just what countries are spoken in, it's also what major cities, different parts of the world are they spoken? Is this language spoken in trade cities, coastal regions, things like that. And then once I figure out where this specific language is spoken in the world, then I jump into all of the phonetic things. How do I want this language to sound? Do I want it to be beautiful and lyrical, short and choppy, gruff, angry? But another cool thing to do too, when you are figuring out how you want your language to sound, is to remember that you're writing a story. So how this language looks is a really great tool you can utilize that cannot be utilized in visual media. So, what I mean by how does it look? Are the words, are they short, choppy words? Are there double letters, double consonants, double vowels? Is there a repetition of 3 specific letters in a row that creates a certain sound and things like that? And that, to me, how the language sound or how the language looks when it is written is a little bit more important to me than how it sounds, because chances are your reader is, or I guess it's more likely that your reader is not going to be reading these things aloud. They might be trying to sound it out in their head, but if you have 2 different foreign languages being spoken in your story, it's good to distinguish them, how they sound, but also how they're written. So, before we actually get into building the language, another thing to keep in mind too, that when your characters are speaking these words, the last thing you want to do is write some illegible word and then say, so-and-so said this in this language, which means this, because it's really boring. So it's another thing you can do too is give these languages sort of a different mouthfeel, facial expression. I remember when I was attempting to learn German in high school, I had to make really angry faces to even attempt to properly pronounce these words, and that's something you can add to your story. So if you have a language with a very distinct set of facial expressions that need to be made to pronounce these words, you can infer which language is being spoken without actually saying so. And then, once you have an idea of how many languages you want, what you want them to sound like and look like and all of these things, you want to look into how much of this language do you want to build. Are you just going to have a smattering of words here and there, or are you going to have full sentences? And at which point you would need to decide, what does sentence structure look like? It's very rare that translations between languages are spot on word for word. When you move from language to language, subject and noun and verb and these things get moved around. So you don't want a perfect direct translation with the same size words. And I said I'm not a linguist, but little things like this really do stand out in your story. If you're just, being lazy with it, and this is with any world building, if you're going to be lazy with it, if you're just going to throw in some random combination of letters and call it a secondary language, people are going to pick up on that, and it can be really jarring. It can really throw people out of your story. So, if you're going to have characters speaking this language in full sentences, you really need to dig into the grammar of things, the sentence structure, as well as how it looks and how it sounds. So just don't make it random. And so, once you have sort of these base ideas, it's really just getting creative with it. How do you want the words to sound? How do you want them to look? All these things. But also, is this culture where this language is being spoken, are they very formal? Are there prefixes that they add to names? Do they speak in long lyrical sentences, or are things like slang more common? And another thing to think about is it's not just about the words being spoken. It's also the body language and the gestures. If you have a person that says something in a foreign language, but then they bow, that lets you know that it's a very formal greeting. Or if you have someone that says something in a foreign word and then they shake hands, then you know that is probably an informal greeting. But another thing too is you don't have to just create foreign words. I love this example because it's something that I hadn't seen before. In Patrick Rothfuss's The Wise Man's Fear, he has this sort of, cordoned off culture that's not really part of the fabric of the rest of society. And, they speak how everyone else does, but they speak in their own language, but they do not use body language. They do not use facial expressions at all whatsoever. Instead, they have this form of hand speak. When their hand is in a different position, it inflects whatever they're saying, which is really great for sarcasm. Their voice could be saying, yeah, that sounds great, but their hand could be saying, oh, no way in hell, kind of a scenario. So those are little things you can build to around your language. It's not just about words. And I would love to be able to give you guys tips on, how to create specific words. But if I did that, we would be here all day. And I don't do this myself, but one thing that you can do is create your own alphabet with fewer letters to try and put these words together and make it a little bit simpler, a little bit easier. But I do have a resource for you. If you are having problems with how you want your language to sound and you really just don't know where to start because you're like me and you don't know anything about language, a good thing to do is go and listen to some music in a language that is not your native language. Listen to the music, pick out the sounds you like, and just start jotting down what you hear. And that is a really good way to come up with neat, distinct, interesting words, and then just start putting things together and keep a log of these things. When you're building languages, when you're building worlds, Notes, no matter how lengthy, in-depth, or sparse they are a really big help. So, I don't have a formal resource for you this week, but hey, you need to go listen to music. Seems like a pretty good resource to me. If you guys have any questions, if you want me to try and go a little bit more in depth, just drop them below and I'll get back to you. And next week we're going to talk about magic systems, so I hope to see you guys for that. But in the meantime, as always, you should be writing stuff.